I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Rocky Romanella. Rocky is the CEO and founder of 3Sixty Management Services. Also, he is a motivational speaker on the topic of leadership. And today, I want to find out, what is a leader? What is a good leader? And what we can do to not only become one, but to follow them, whether it's in the home or in the workplace. Join me in my conversation today with Rocky Romanella. I'm Brian V, and this is Why We Work. Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Rocky Romanella. Good morning, fine sir.
Well, good morning. Well, good evening to you in South
Yes,
Korea. It's a pleasure to speak with you, Brian.
it's a great pleasure to speak with you. And I think not only because of the work, the line of work you've been in and what you're doing, but from some of the things I've read and listened to with previous interviews that you've been on, it seems like your character plays a great part in who you are and all of the success that you've had. I've done a little introduction to you. Could you give us maybe just a brief summary of what it is you're doing, and then I might just take you back?
Well, that would be wonderful then. So today I'm the founder and CEO of 360 Management Services. It's a company that that really stands on three legs of a stool. One is keynote speaking, one is leadership training, the second is leadership training, and the third is consulting. We do process improvement, some M&A work, and those kinds of things. And it's really been a way for me to kind of expand my career and utilize some of the lessons that I learned through my over 40-year career, and see if I could be helpful to others as they're growing and developing in their career. So it's been a fun opportunity for me to, I have this concept of legacy where, to me, legacy is this concept of, do you leave things a little better than you found them? Are people better because of their time with you? And so this has given me an opportunity to expand that legacy or build on that legacy, hopefully through some of my lessons and through the book Tighten the Lug Nuts that I wrote. People can maybe gain some knowledge, some experience, and help them through some difficult times.
So Rocky, as you said to call you rather than Mr.
Yes.
Romanella,
Oh, never, never. That's my dad who's since passed, but that's still Mr. Romanella.
you talk about legacy, and I think I heard in one of your interviews you're pretty poor at retiring. So would it be safe to say that you're at retirement age?
Yes, sir. Yeah. So I had a 36-year career at UPS, wonderful opportunities and career there at UPS, retired from UPS, was recruited to be a CEO of a telecom company. It was the 3G to 4G time. And now then I started 360. So I'll give you, let's see if your audience could do some math. So I started with UPS June 15th, 1976, right out of high school. So,
I'm 44 because I was born in 77. So
ah, so, so here you go, 63.
that was it. I was sweating
Well, the math, yeah, I
math
know.
question on the spot.
Yeah, at
Rock,
least I didn't tell you if A is X and
yeah, oh
Y
yeah.
is,
If you put
yeah, I
any
didn't
other
take it out.
variables in, I was
Yeah,
done.
yeah, you were done.
Would you do me a favor, Rocky, and maybe bring us back? Even I'd heard you go back into college days, but what was your very first job? And I know some people scramble to think, especially being in America, and what was that, the legal job that I had but something, lemonade stand, something that maybe showed an entrepreneurial spirit that I know that you have, something that got you out of the house, or maybe even a puppet show, as I heard one of my guests say, charging
Oh,
his
there we
friends
go.
10 cents. Yeah.
Well, see, back in the States, we had I guess it would be a franchise. It was called Stewart's Root Beer. And you would pull up your car and you could get a root beer and some hot dogs and some hamburgers. And they had car hops. So you had the white shirt, the black tie on, and the car hop hat. And you pulled up. I would come out and take your order, Brian, and I'd come back with a tray, put it on your window. And we had a little coin change
Hmm.
thing. And I was a car hop. I was 14 at the time. And one of the girls I went to high school with at the time, Lynn, her dad owned three or four of them. And that was the first time I kind of got some insight into being an entrepreneur, because I saw her dad own these
Hmm.
two or three Stewart's Root Beer. That was my first job. And it's funny because I worked for probably 2 or 3 weeks without pay there. And how that happened was, so my first day, I'm all excited, got my white shirt, nice, clean and pressed, got the hat on. So I bring you your food. Now you pay me. And then I made the cardinal mistake of car hops, which is you put the tray on the roof as I gave you the coin chains.
Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, you pull away and all these root beer cups, glasses go flying all over. And I
So
ended
you
up
had to
spending
pay for the first
yeah, the
couple of
first, yeah,
weeks.
yeah, first few weeks I was paying Mr. Dunham for his, for his root beer mugs, but very valuable lesson. Safety first, always. That's my first safety first lesson as well. But yeah, that was my first job. I was a
So
car hopper.
that was your friend. What was the reason for getting the job? Why did you get out of the house and go work?
Well, my dad, rest his soul, believed that your job was to get out there and work and be part of society and so if you're old enough if I was legally old enough to work, let's go get a job. So I worked summers. I was at Stewart Root Beer. I worked in a coat factory where they made little girls' coats in the summertime. So if I wasn't playing sports, I was working. So that was the way we were brought up. And so I think that's where, my dad instilled in all of us, this hard work, this kind of work ethic that, you feel good about yourself when you're working and you're producing results and you're giving back to society and you're feeling good about yourself and you're not dependent on anyone else. And so, I think that's, I kind of grew up with that as my, as my foundational piece.
Rocky, could you speak more firsthand about your father? Because I've heard a few interviews, and you mentioned him, and you've mentioned him prior to us speaking here a moment ago and recording. But like I said, what I'm gathering from your character, a lot comes from the family values that you've received, and specifically of what your dad has taught you and his work ethic. So could you speak a little bit about him? Because I really think everything you say, except for your own experience that you developed along the way, a lot is from that foundation.
Well, thank you for asking. I mean, he was just a great individual, and it's funny, as a current dad and now grandfather, you always wonder, are you doing the right things as a parent? Are you teaching the right lessons? Are you setting the right example? My dad in many ways was that, simple. He came from Italy, he wanted to be American. He used to always say, we're Italian American, but we're Americans, and we've got this opportunity here and we've really got to show people that we belong here and work hard. And so
Mm.
when I got my first job, at UPS, he told me two things that stuck with me my whole life and career. The first thing he said to me is, whatever they ask you to do, say yes and thank you,
Mm.
and then learn your job and learn some more. And here's a person who went to freshman year of high school and and then started a full-time career job at a tool and die shop and just started working to provide for the family. He used to always say to us, me and my brother Georgie, used to always say, "Hey, look, if you got to work 3 jobs, if you got to pump gas, if you got to wash window, whatever you got to do, you got to put food on the table for your family. Nothing's more important than you providing for your family." And so that's the way we were brought up. And then the second thing when he told me learn your job and learn some more, I didn't understand what that meant, but what it really meant was the day you think you've made it is the day you're losing step. It's the day you're kind of,
Mhm.
lost a little edge. And so never think that you know everything, never think that you've learned everything. Just keep digging, keep finding new ways to do things and understand. And so that stuck with me my whole career. And as I was, UPS had a promotion from within policy. And as I was getting tapped on the shoulder for different jobs or different responsibilities, I may not have always felt ready for that responsibility, but all I could hear my dad over my shoulder saying, "Hey, whatever they ask you to do, say yes and thank you." And so that lesson for me was so valuable because what he instilled in me was the yes and thank you. But then he also, through me going through that, taught me a valuable lesson as a leader. And that was, there are times that you have to believe in your people when they're not ready to believe in themselves, right? They may not be ready for that. They may not have the confidence, the knowledge, or the experience, but you believe in them. You bridge that gap. And so I think that was such an important lesson for me as I was growing and developing, in management and leadership roles. But it started with my dad saying, "Hey, just yes and thank you, and learn your job and learn some more." And so I would be that individual then saying, "Okay, they said yes and thank you, or they said yes, they're ready for that next responsibility. I have to believe in them until they're ready to believe in themselves and bridge that gap." And so they were some valuable lessons. And, he would never, if he was sitting here or he's up there at the big kitchen table in heaven with the rest of the family members, he would never say that those are the things he taught me. He would always be so humble. No, you learned it on your own. You worked hard, everything you got, you deserved yourself. But at the end of the day, it all was the things that he instilled in us, And I would say the last thing that's always stuck with me, not the last, but one of the other foundational things was he always said, it's what you do when no one's watching that counts. And of course, as a kid, you would say, Brian, as a kid, I'd say, hey, Dad, no one's watching. That's kind of the best part of this whole thing. And he's kind of ruined it for us. And he'd look at me and he'd smile and he'd say, there's always two people watching, the man upstairs and the person looking in the mirror. And you have to be able to look in that mirror and know you did the best job you can. You may not have got all the results you wanted. It may not have worked out the way you wanted, but you have to look in the mirror and know that you did everything you could. You were the best at what you could do, and you gave it everything. And so I think, to me, those were the three, lessons, or the three foundational things that he taught us. And of course, you watched his work ethic. It was amazing. I mean, he just never stopped.
Thank you for bringing us down that road, because not only are they important, and as you said, being a father and grandfather, we question our ability to raise our children, but for people who never had role models or people in their lives, by just hearing this, it gives them a sense of direction as well, because they're great lessons to have learned.
Well, I also think that, I think sometimes what happens is people look at the end, and then they say, oh, that's where I want to get to, and that's where I want to be. And that's a great aspiration, but it's the journey that really defines and builds and helps you kind of, build that character and who you are. It's funny. I have an opportunity now through the keynote speaking to speak with juniors and seniors in college, or, juniors and seniors in high school, or, we'll do some orientations for people starting at companies. And you'll get asked that question a lot about your career and some of the thoughts and suggestions that you may have. But I always start with a question back to them. And I always say to them, think of the word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career. What's that word that you want someone to say to describe Brian or describe Rocky? And it's amazing the answers they'll come up with. Some will say rich, successful. Some will say energetic. Some will say decisive. I was that leader that can make decisive decisions. But what's that word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career? Now, for me, the word was thoughtful. I wanted to be a thoughtful leader. I wanted to make decisions looking at it from its widest consequences. How did it impact our customers, our people, our shareholders, stakeholders? I wanted to be that thoughtful leader. And why I think that's such an important exercise for people is because once you decide what that word is, then you're building a mosaic to that word throughout your career. All the things that you do. So if thoughtful was my word, all the decisions that I made, whether consciously or unconsciously, or, you're making them with that thoughtful word in mind, because that's the word, that's your brand. Yeah. And, your brand has an identity, and then your brand has a promise. And so I think that's such an important exercise for people to go through if they haven't done that. Really take the moment and think about, what's that word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career? I know, Brian, what would that word be for you, do you think?
Well, obviously I'm thinking of it. As you know, I probably would be thinking of it as you're speaking.
Yeah.
So faithful, loving, faithful. I want to say consistent, but that sounds too much like decisive. But I think faithful would be one, and loving, but also consistent. So maybe I'll go with faithful.
Yeah, and I think about that word, what it means. People can count on you. The things that, you have belief in things. If it's a business side, you have belief in processes. You have belief in people because you understand, that they're, as a faithful individual, you have faith. You have belief in things that you don't always understand, but in your heart of hearts, you believe it's the right thing to do. So you do those things. That single word, and as people start their journey in their careers, or they could be at a midpoint in their career and they feel like they're not really quite sure where this journey is going to take them, and they haven't gone through this exercise. To me, it's always a great exercise. If I'm doing coaching, or mentoring sessions, I'll always start with that question. What's that word you want someone to use to describe you at the end of your career? And it really does. You can start to see people tilt their head, almost have that aha moment, like, okay, let me think about this. I've never thought about it in that way. And I think that becomes such an important part of who you become as a person, as a leader, as you're moving through your career.
It's kind of like one of the questions that I would have asked, but I'll probably not ask it anymore because you're bringing it up now. But the idea of, would you or someone that I'm talking to say that you put your career first, or are you putting your character first in your work? And then if it's your career, what is it you're trying to attain, which could be um, fruitless to some extent if you're only putting your career first. But if it's your character, what character trait are you trying to work out and trying to perfect as you go along in your work? So I find it's kind of similar. I mean, I like the way you articulate it and raise it to the word, and then that gives you the clarity and what it is that you want to attain, and that spreads out in your career and that spreads out in your life. And I think it's a great way to put it, and I've never heard it put that way.
Yeah, I mean that's a great question you have as well. I mean, I would say it to me, it's about character. The character is the foundation of who you are. Uh, the career is just sort of like I guess you would say, if you think about a house, the career is really kind of the outside of the house. Oh, he's got shingles. Oh, he's got, nice siding. He's a brick house. Whatever those things are can change. They can be changed, but character is who you are. I think character is three things: who you are, what you stand for, and what are the things you won't compromise. And very few people can articulate those three things in that manner. And I think that's important, as you take inventory as a leader, as a person, who are you? What do you stand for? And what are the things you won't compromise? And I'll tell you, Brian, one and two, most people can articulate very well. In fact, companies should do the same thing. And if you think about companies today, they can tell you who they are, what they stand for. There's value statements, mission statements. They're all throughout their organization. There's posters in every cafeteria you can find. But number three is what gets them in trouble all the time. What are the things you won't compromise? And you can think of major corporations around the world that have had a problem with number three. They can tell you who they are. They can tell you what they stand for. But what are the things they won't compromise, because they haven't really defined it or articulated it? And I think that's the measure of character. Who is Rocky Romanella? What does he stand for? And what are the things he won't compromise? And I think it starts with me understanding it, and then through my actions, the people in my care in an organization, or people that I, interact with outside of work, really kind of get that understanding. It becomes my brand identity, and really becomes my brand promise, if you think about it.
I have a few more questions about leadership, but maybe we can trace how you got into UPS and how you made the step out of UPS into what you're doing now.
So I started at UPS as a part-timer unloading trailers, working my way through college. My dad, it was funny, he said to me one day, he goes, "Hey, one of my kids is going to go to college. It's you. You're the oldest, but we don't really got any money." So UPS gave me the way to work my way through college. Now, interestingly enough, I went to college to be a high school history teacher and a baseball coach. And as I was working my way through college and working at UPS, I started to recognize that the best leaders were those people who could get their people to connect the dots, that really were educating and training and working with their people. And so I never gave up my coaching or teaching passion. I just did it in a different venue. And so I changed my major to management, and then became a UPS driver after I graduated college, which was a great opportunity for me.
My
And
brother
then
is a UPS driver now, by the way. My
your
brother,
brothers?
yeah,
Oh,
Canada.
I tell you, the hard worker. Those drivers
They
work very,
certainly
very
are.
hard. And by the way, that's the brand of UPS. If you think about it, UPS isn't Rocky Romanella or the CEO, now Carol, or before Dave Abney. No, the UPS is your brother who's interacting the closest with our customers and executing on the brand promise. So tell him to be safe, and tell him thanks for all he does on behalf of the organization.
Yeah, I will.
But became became a supervisor, and then began this journey. As I said, we had a promotion from within policy, which I took advantage of. And so the thing that's a little different with my UPS career versus many other UPSers that I know and spend time with or are there today is I had the opportunity to do some non-traditional things in UPS. So for example, we purchased mailboxes, et cetera, and then rebranded it to the UPS store. Had the opportunity to take it through that rebranding. It's today still the largest rebranding of a franchise network in franchise history. And that gave me the chance to work with wonderful, wonderful entrepreneurs. UPS Store Network is 100% 100% owned by entrepreneurs. It's not there's no company-owned stores.
Mm-hmm.
So it gave me a chance to meet and work with some of the wonderful, wonderful people and some of the greatest entrepreneurs out there. So that was my first kind of introduction into the entrepreneurial spirit, working with entrepreneurs. And they were so gracious to work with me and help me understand it. And the thing I learned is that nobody's more all in than an entrepreneur. I mean, at the end of the day, they take everything they own, slide it across the table and say, hey, I want to purchase a business or start a business, and they're all in. And then the thing that really the thing that really was the aha moment for me was, if you think about being all in, every night, they hit the cash register, the door opens, they pay their people, pay their vendors.
Mm-hmm.
What's left is what they take home for their family. So you really get a sense of that entrepreneurial spirit and how committed they are and how dedicated they are. And it really is a fantastic group of people. And then after that assignment, we purchased over 20 companies and built what's today UPS Supply Chain Solutions. So I did that integration and then ran this side of the world for UPS, and then retired as we spoke, CEO of a telecom company. And then so we had a sale there, and then I started my own business. So as I said, as you mentioned, you heard me say before, which is true, I do fail at retiring pretty often.
It's maybe you could speak just a moment, but you said how as your father is kind of speaking over your shoulder to say, like, kind of keep going up. Some of those positions you had are, to me, would be quite overwhelming. And maybe you're batting up, you're punching up in stepping up to these challenges. Can you speak of how you may have felt as you kind of progressed along in your career? Because it seems like quite a challenge.
Oh, my biggest concern always was they're going to figure out that I'm the guy they put in charge. And wait a minute, that's the guy we put in charge? Come on, I thought he was taller. That's not the guy, right? The guy looks like Super Mario. How do we put him in charge of this organization? No, I agree with you. So a couple things, a couple lessons along the way were very helpful. Number one is, so as I got promoted, before I got promoted, I was a driver, and I loved that experience of being a UPS driver and learning, right from the bottom up on how we deliver a package and how
Yeah.
we service our customers.
Yeah,
And of
the
course,
whole
I
system.
loaded, unloaded trailers, so I learned it from the grassroots from there. And so that was a valuable lesson for me. So every new assignment I
Hmm.
received, especially those that I didn't have experience in, the first thing I did was, so for example, we purchased mailbox, et cetera. I get tapped on the shoulder. We want you to run this on behalf of UPS and work with the franchisor and the franchisees. First thing I did was put an apron on and work a day in a store.
Yeah.
When I, as the supply chain, general manager and president of the supply chain, went out and spent time in a warehouse picking orders, understanding the WMS, the warehouse management system. And in the cell tower business, I couldn't climb because I wasn't a certified climber, but you went to a cell site tower,
Right.
you went with your installers and spent the day. And so for me, the first thing I always did was get out and spend a day, with the people who represent your organization and the
Yeah.
people who are executing the brand promise. And that always was very helpful for me. It grounded me.
Yeah.
And I also think it showed the individuals in our organization and the people in my care that, I respected what they did. And look, they knew I didn't have the expertise that they did, but they knew that I wanted to understand it. And I think they at least were happy to know that, hey, he cares enough about what we do that he's willing to take the time to come out and understand it from our point of view. And so that to me was the first major lesson, the thing I learned because I was started as a driver and loaded trailers that I
Worked your way
emulated
up.
throughout my career.
What is it now? You're not retired, but what is it now that takes up your time? 2020 might be threw us a curveball here, but what is your regular day like? What is it that you're pursuing? What keeps you at work?
Well, for me, I enjoy the keynote speaking and the leadership training that we do, and developing content, developing some of the lessons and training. To me, that's always been the passion for me of
Yeah.
training. Like, you know, like, to be frank with you, most of the people I went to high school with, if you said to them, "Hey, Rocky's a keynote speaker," they'd be like, "Nah, you got the wrong Rocky. There's got to be, it's got to be another one of the Rockies in his family." But because I was never that individual who, was out there a lot. Or I remember in fifth grade at our Christmas play, I said, I went to Catholic school. Hey, I'll just be baby Jesus. Lay me in swaddling clothes and lay me in a manger. I don't really want any speaking parts. And so today I'm giving keynotes in front of hundreds of people. But but for me, the keynote is just an extension of what I've always wanted to do, the passion of teaching, the
Yeah.
passion of, getting people to connect the dots, see that light bulb go off over their head, that you've been able to articulate a thought or a vision that they can see, and now they understand. So for me, it's building content. I wrote my first book, Tighten the Lug Nuts. That to me was, I sat there the first day looking at this blank piece of paper thinking, now, who's going to read a book that I wrote? And do I got enough in the book that someone could read? And so then you start to write down your experiences and the stories and the things along the way. And so it became a fun passion project for me. And I really enjoyed that. So those occupy most of my time. We do have active consulting engagements, which, I spend time with, but we have 2 or 3 other partners that are much more active in the consulting. But I like the consulting side in the strategy piece of it. What are we going to look like in the next 6 months, 18 months from now, 3 years from now, kind of concept. So for me, it's more of the strategic vision of it. Bill and Mark and Ed do a lot of the tactical side of actually working with the teams that we're working with, and helping them get, understand the vision of what we're trying to accomplish, and then training and helping them get there. But for me, it's most, a lot of it's just training. A lot of it's the passion of building a good keynote that an organization needs to help move their thoughts forward. And, this year I've done over 100 podcast interviews talking about the book, or talking about, I've got like 24 leadership competencies that I think are so important to leaders. And so a lot of my interviews will be based on 1 or 2 of those concepts. And so I build those out as well.
If I didn't know you wrote a book before, I would say, why haven't you written a book? But now that I know that you have written the book, Tighten the Lug Nuts, the Principles of Balanced Leadership, where's the next one? I mean, I think you're a man of a wealth of knowledge and wisdom. So do you have one in the mix?
Well, thanks for asking. So the answer is yes. And so it's a little bit different. So Tighten the Lug Nuts is sort of this journey, and it's written in the third person, written by the third person is a gentleman by the name of Joe Scafone. And how I created Joe Scafone was many years ago, Brian, when I was sitting at a meeting, and you would bring forth an idea, and I would say, well, that's a good idea, Brian, but what if? And I
Mm-hmm.
always felt like the what if, I could watch your face and you would be like, maybe I don't think it's a good idea. Maybe I didn't do enough homework. And it was never my intention
Yeah.
to make you feel that way. My intention was only to help, maybe, kind of push you not to stop at the first right answer, maybe look past that first right answer, or challenge you in a positive way to maybe, look a little deeper and wider. But it never felt like that was what was happening. And so I created this character just in the course of a conversation one day. I'd say, hey, Brian, that's a good idea, but you think Joe Scafone thinks that's a good idea? And so that
Yeah.
became my way of challenging you. And I never had to say, oh, well, I would look at it differently, or I would do it differently. I'd say, you think Joe thinks that's a good idea. And so for me, that was my way of putting a positive spin and making it easier for you to, challenge you not to stop at the first right answer, but also make you feel good about what you presented. And so the first book was sort of this journey and lessons learned through Joe Scafone.
Mm-hmm.
And so, and each chapter stands on its own merit, and there's a leadership lesson, or uh, a lesson on maybe how to look at things differently. The second book I've been working on, I've got my first chapter done, is so throughout my career, besides, as you can tell now, I used to tell a lot of stories and a lot of analogies, but I also used to use words from songs to sometimes, kind of make a point. So for example, somebody who, is not really taking ownership or something, you might say, hey, you can check Hotel California. You can check out anytime you like, but you can never leave. You own this. You know that, by the way. This is your
Mm-hmm.
responsibility. Or somebody wants somebody thinks they're ready for the next responsibility, and it's the song Center Field. Put me in, coach. I'm ready. Okay, are you really ready?
Right.
So the next book, my thought is each chapter would be a lesson, but it would be based on a song. So the first chapter I wrote to test this is on legacy, and it's from the leader of the band. I am the living legacy to the leader of the band. And so you kind of use a couple of those lyrics, but then you write the chapter. But it's fun to have those kinds of songs that resonate with people, and use some of the words, smuggler's blues, I knew the gun was loaded, but I didn't think it'd kill. How many times you make these decisions that you don't really think through, and you're like, I probably should have thought about this a little bit deeper before I jumped in the pool, right? So those kinds of things. So that's book 2 is more, each chapter will have a song, and then there'll be the lesson that kind of the song supports.
Well,
So I have a little bit of fun.
I'm glad that you do have a book, but I'm sure you even have a few more in you as well. It's funny you mentioned that book, because when you talked about character and said, yeah, you're a brick house, and I thought, was it Rick James or something? You're a
Yeah.
brick house.
House, right? Yeah.
What brings you satisfaction now? I mean, you're a man of wealth. You have wisdom beyond my capability. And I just wonder, what brings you satisfaction in what you do? Where do you find those gems of jewels that you can really chomp on and say, I'm doing a pretty good job at my work?
So for me, it's always that ability to help someone, move along or understand or see things, or, at times it's nothing more than just being that good listener, the ability that you can help make things a little better than you found them. And for me, that's the satisfaction of, hey, someone along the way put their arm around me and helped Rocky through this situation, or believed in Rocky before Rocky was ready to believe in themselves. And so for me, I think that's part of, that's part of that, your legacy. Do you leave things a little better than you found them? Are people better because of their time with you? And then on a personal side, Deb and I are very fortunate. We just had, during COVID, ironically, had grandchild number 6 and 7. So we have 7.
Congratulations. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. We have 7 beautiful grandkids, or 4.5 to 5 months now. So they keep us busy. And I live in Jersey, and all my kids and grandkids are here in Jersey. So we're very fortunate. Usually, I moved across the country 9 times with UPS. So, a lot of my UPS friends and partners, left kids in different places. For me, everybody ended up coming back to Jersey, being in Jersey. So it makes it, great for us to be able to see the kids, see the grandkids. And I think that's, it's just fun to watch them, and, kind of sit back and watch as they interact and they get together. And, look, it's always about your family, right? I mean, they're not perfect, but they're your family. And, and how do you get through, the challenges as everybody's growing and everybody's, very busy, but you always got to make sure that you find time to, to take the time to understand how important family is. And, my dad said to me one day, we're at a wake one day, and, somebody had just came in, and they hadn't spoken to to someone in their family for many years. And he looked at me and he said to me, that person coming here is really only for themselves. If you're going to respect people, you respect them when they're alive. And you think about it from that perspective. And I always think about that, because how many times someone in your, in a family or a friend who years have gone by, they're estranged from their brother or sister or someone in their family or somebody, and they don't even remember why they're not talking to each other. And I always think back to what my dad said, the true measure of respect is you respect people when they're alive, and you find a way to work through that, because once they've passed, you're only at that wake to make yourself feel better. That person, isn't there, and their family, you're not making the family feel any better. So that's one of those, as I said when we first started. I mean, he had these ways of telling you things that, you think back now, and it's like, wow, it's like, holy cow. He was a good person who, just just came out with these pearls that he had no idea that they were pearls of wisdom. But
time allows them to sink in a little bit better too, especially with life experiences.
oh yeah, and plus when you're 18 years old, you pretty much think, what's that old saying? When they're a baby, they think, as a parent, you're the most important thing. Then when they're 18, you're not the smartest guy in the world anymore. And then when you become a parent, you're like, that was some pretty good stuff he said. I'm quite, it's funny right now during COVID, I started doing some woodworking, and my father was an outstanding carpenter. He was a tool and die maker, but he was an outstanding carpenter. My brother George, he's excellent at it, but so I started doing some woodworking. So, I made a table and I helped my son, Rocky, make a cabinet. And so I was talking to my brother, Georgie, and he looks at me and goes, "Hey, maybe you were paying attention when Daddy was yelling at you all the time." So I guess I was. I didn't, I was always that kid that was getting himself maybe in a little bit of trouble. Plus I was always playing sports, so you're always so occupied. But no, you're right. And look, isn't that really our hope as parents, is that maybe someday, as your children are making decisions, that hopefully there's a part of you that can help in a positive way, maybe help them with a decision.
Speaking of advice, what is a tip that you may have for my listeners who are getting into work, whether it's their first job, something passing out hamburgers or sodas, or they're changing their careers after a few years in there, but they're getting into something new? What sort of tip would you have for them? Some advice?
Well, the first thing I would say to them is, real quickly, and I know your time is precious, but I would say the first thing is that I think sometimes everybody believes that, there's a clear understanding of who you are and what you want to be. Well, that's never true. Most times people start out, look at me, I started out to be a high school history teacher and a baseball coach. And then now I'm doing keynote speaking, the farthest thing away. And in the interim, then through that journey, I did so many different things. So I think the first thing I would say is be open to learning. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. You're going to make them small, make them fast, and move on. I think what's important is that you do things with an honest heart, that, your intentions are good. You want to be the best that you can. Sometimes things just don't always work out, but you go in with the idea that I'm going to give it my all. The two fundamental, or the two, I would say, foundations of success are hard work and enthusiasm. There's no substitute for hard work. No matter how much technology there is, hard work is still going to be important. Excuse me. But hard work without enthusiasm is just that. Hard work gets old. So you have to bring that enthusiasm. And I think sometimes people think that someone else is going to generate that enthusiasm, or someone else needs to motivate me. You know what? It starts with you, right? So I would leave you with these two things. Number one, don't let anybody impact you more than you can impact yourself. And number two, you are the architect of your own destiny. If you want it, you got to go get it. You do it the right way, but you got to go get it. And you have to be the architect of your own destiny. And don't ever allow anybody to impact you more than you can impact yourself.
Rocky Romanella, how can people reach you? How can they connect with you, especially in your keynote speaking, when this 2020 passes us by and we pick up on business a little bit more? How can they reach you?
I think the easiest way is, so we have two websites, but the easiest website is tightentheLugnuts.com, and then that gets you over to 3Sixty. There's leadership training on you can get to. You can read a preview of the book if you'd like. You can interact with me through a contact me form. I answer all my own inquiries. And then on the 3Sixty site, which you can get through to Tighten the Lug Nuts, there's over 100, there's like 110, 115 podcasts on the different leadership competencies. I'll post ours up as well there. I think that's a good opportunity for learning. We have quite a few YouTube videos. You can see me speaking. So I think that's probably the best way. Of course, it's rockyromanella@gmail.com. And Brian, if any of your audience, would like to correspond with me, or they send you some questions or whatever, please know that I'll help in any way I can. So certainly you can count on me to support your audience any way I can.
Rocky, I have one final question for you, and that is, why do you work?
Well, I don't work. Teaching is never working. Teaching is a passion. So I don't consider it work. I enjoy the ability to meet new people. Look at this conversation you and I are having today. I've met a great individual in South Korea, from Canada originally. wonderful family, and through our conversations, I've learned some things from you. Hopefully, maybe created a few aha moments for you and your audience. So for me,
Absolutely.
I love that. I love the interaction. I love staying current, and I love meeting some wonderful people. So it's not really, for me, it's not really work. Teaching is never work.
Rocky Romanella, you are a gentleman and a saint. Thank you,
Well,
fine
thank you,
sir.
sir. Thank you too. It's a pleasure meeting you. Be safe, be well, and hopefully we'll talk soon.
I would enjoy that very much. Take care, sir.